Speed Machines 3 is an arcade and cartoony style racing game that was developed for the PlayStation in 2006 and was published by Phoenix Games. And this game would come from a long line of budget style titles that was released on the system at the time, and has a lot of cartoony style elements in terms of the graphics and the visuals that in some regards, when you look at it visually, takes many influences from many top down kind of cartoony style racers, even with regards to the Micro Machines games that would have been seen on the original PlayStation and even on the PS2 and so forth. But the one thing to get straight out of the way is that this game is not anything like the Micro Machines games, and it genuinely isn't as good, as this game got seriously negative reviews across the board on magazines stating that the gameplay was slow, sluggish, clunky, and in some cases unplayable, which is kind of reflective in the gameplay, because the game itself, although while it does have some funky style of graphics that would appeal to more younger dynamic of players, more so with kids and stuff, the game is very, very tough. The collision detection is really bad in this game. You will fall off and slide off the track, and it feels like the car isn't planted to the road. It feels like that you're just hovering along and floating on air, even if you're more like skating on ice. It's very, very hard to handle the cars. It feels like you're driving a tank in some regards. It just, the frame rate just feels very choppy. It's just, even though from a visual perspective, if you like cartoony style games, it doesn't look all that bad from a visual standpoint, but it's just when you go to play the game, you can instantly tell that this game is not well put together. It's very, very clunky, it's very sluggish, and it's just, in some regards, most people would consider this game to be a mess, and in some ways it actually is, because the level design on some of the tracks doesn't reflect how the game plays, because you end up having to avoid obstacles and go over jumps and cliffs, and because of the handling and physics of the cars and even the collision detections, sometimes that those jumps can be considered hindrances, because the collision detection is so bad in the game that it can feel like as if you get stuck in the environment and you won't be able to get past it at all. And to make things probably somewhat worse with this game as well, and it was the case with a lot of these budget style games that were seen on the PS2, is that the front cover of the game would completely throw players off, because you look at the front cover, and the front cover of the game is probably the game's best feature, if I'll be honest. It actually looks really cool, but then you look at the back and you realise that the front cover does not reflect what you see on the back, and then when you go to actually play the game, it definitely doesn't reflect it. Like, it does have some quirks in terms of its visuals, and I can see the idea behind it, and it probably would appeal to more kids and younger audience of players, but for more hardcore enthusiasts and even players that generally like these type of top-down kind of cartoony style racers, this game would prove to be a disappointment for many players, because there is a lot better put together and more refined games that are available on the PlayStation and even on the PS1. This game wouldn't be that. Now, it is playable and you can win races, but not without pulling your hair out to some degree, because mix the poor collision detection and the clunky and yet somewhat silly and poor quality computer AI that can catch up with you at a moment's notice, no matter how far you are in the level, and coupled with that with the clunky physics, it leads for a downright frustrating and almost unplayable experience at times, and it will almost become unplayable, especially when you get into later levels in the game. It's just, sometimes it can be too frustrating and too hampering to even consider it to want to play even further into the game in most regards. It's just there's too many silly things that keep happening in the game that will just frustrate the hell out of most players. And I'd imagine that if you did happen to have this game, you'd only buy it to add it to your collection. You probably would never play it. You'd probably just sit there collecting dust, and that's just trying to be as respectful as I can towards it. Now, I hate to speak negatively of games, but even at that, I do have to be realistic with regards to the quality of specific games. Like, I do like the visual style of it, and I do understand what it's trying to go for, but the problem is everything else in the game is just not executed nowhere near to the level that it could have been. It is pretty much a mess, and if this was to be released today, nobody would buy it, literally, and I'm sure that it didn't sell well back in the day either. But even at that, you'd be thinking to yourself, why would people release a game when you know it's not fully fleshed out like this? But it is what it is, and that was always the idea, and you still even see that with modern games today. There's a lot of games that you do see on the likes of the PlayStation Store, even online stores, and there's many, especially particularly racing games in general, that just aren't as well put together. They do have some nice ideas and concepts, don't get me wrong, but they just are lackluster, and they just miss the point from what could have been or what could have been, and that's where they usually fall short. And unfortunately, that's just the unfortunate aspect with a lot of these games, which is a pity, as they do fall short of the mark in so many regards. But again, it is what it is. It's a budget title at the end of the day. It's never going to break new grounds. It will appeal to some players while it won't appeal to others, but that's just the reality of it. But I would love to know your thoughts on Speed Machines 3 for the PS2 if you have played it yourself back in the day, and if so, what did you think of this game overall? Did you enjoy it, or maybe maybe not so much, which I'm sure probably most people probably didn't. But anyway, I would love to hear your stories of this game, if you do have any at all. So be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be updated of future videos. And if you would like to see more content around other unique and yet somewhat obscure racers like this that was also seen on the PS2, you can check out this playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And I will see you all in the next one.